On the frontier of the Old West, life moved at a tough, unforgiving pace, driven by the need to survive. Far from the moralism of the East, harsh punishments lost their power. In dusty towns, rules were negotiated, judgments were postponed, and everyone drew their own lines to keep going in that still-forming territory, day after day. If you enjoy diving into stories from the Old West like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter. In 1843, Irish-American Tom Tobin began to stand out in the Old West. From mountain man, he became a sought-after tracker, a sharp hunter, and a guide who mastered dangerous trails. He also served as a scout for the United States Army, opening paths through contested lands and supporting key expeditions that helped shape that frontier. In the Old West, drinking beer at room temperature was normal, practically a trademark of the region. Unlike in Europe, where beer usually arrived nice and cold, that rarely happened out there. In 1873, small breweries and local producers supplied saloons and travelers, offering a flavor shaped by the land, the climate, and the routes people followed. In the scene, Red Cloud, an Oglala chief, appears with his full headdress, a vivid expression of his people's culture and spirituality. Standing in front of him, American Horse wears Western clothes and carries a revolver at his waist. The contrast between the two shows the weight of the West's expansion, built on impositions, negotiations, and long silences that were hard to break. In the Old West, hunting was as essential as finding water. After locating a water source, the next step was securing food to keep the settlements going. Across dry terrain and long distances, settlers refined their butchering and gathering techniques, studied the wildlife, and pulled from the land the daily sustenance their families needed. At the end of the 19th century, the West lived between progress and hardship. Towns were growing, machines were taking over, but the countryside moved at a different pace. Across the plains, cowboys drove herds along long routes, connecting ranches, railroads, and markets, quietly keeping the regional economy turning, mostly invisible to the eyes of newcomers. From a very young age, people looked for shortcuts to escape pain. In the Old West, that promise seemed bottled up in cure-alls, little vials that claimed to chase away sickness, bring luck, and ease sadness. At fairs and wagons, people sold the illusion that a sip could turn life upside down, like a quick trick in front of a crowd. The story of the Old West is also told through water. Before the territory became part of the United States, every river, well, and spring shaped routes, settlements, and disputes. Across wide, dry lands, water supplies shifted with the seasons, and while they sparked conflicts, they also created pacts and lasting communities, keeping those places standing. In the mid-19th century, the California gold rush drew adventurers, merchants, and entire families. Among tents and dusty trails, life buzzed in the saloons. There, amid laughter and arguments, poker took the spotlight. Cards, bluffs, and bets shaping alliances, rivalries, and the rhythm of those long nights. At first glance, Killer Jim Miller seemed like an upstanding citizen of the Old West. He greeted his neighbors, paid his bills on time, and went to church. That carefully crafted image kept suspicions away. So when signs of brutal crimes began to appear, the town struggled to believe that the devoted man was, in the shadows, a cold-blooded killer. After the news of gold in California, crowds headed west. More than shiny metal, they were looking to rewrite their own lives. They left their homes, crossed plains and mountains, faced hunger, cold, and uncertainty. The hope of finding a good vein guided every step of that long march without a map, under a horizon that was always unknown. In the Old West, the barber's chair offered more than a clean shave and a trimmed haircut. Between razors, hot towels, and curious bottles, he closed up cuts, pulled bad teeth, and prescribed mixtures. In isolated towns, the barbershop became an informal emergency room for anyone who needed quick relief without asking questions. On the endless crossings of the Old West, the cowboy carried in his saddle the fuel for every journey. Beans cooked over the campfire, hard biscuits that lasted forever, jerky hanging from the saddle, handfuls of dried fruit, and strong coffee. Not very varied, but dependable. It kept the body going from sunrise to sunset. Branding cattle isn't a recent invention. The Egyptians were already using symbols in 2700 BC. Over time, the technique crossed seas, gained strength in medieval Europe, and traveled along colonial routes. In what's now the southwestern United States, Spanish and later Mexican cowboys spread the practice. The red-hot iron became the official signature of every herd. With the California gold rush, letters, contracts, and news began to follow the miners' trail. The growing demand for communication opened new paths toward the west. Messages crossed deserts and mountains as camps turned into towns. With each successful delivery, the frontier gained confidence and pushed one step farther. On the edge of the Old West, every sunrise felt like a test of endurance, day after day. Building a home took persistence. Water, shelter, and food only came with a lot of effort. Work called early. As soon as they could hold a bucket or sweep the floor, very young children were already helping, learning to support the household alongside the older folks. At the end of the 19th century, buffalo hunting supported a large part of the Western economy. The city of Leavenworth in Kansas became a mandatory stop. Warehouses, merchants, and tanneries received loads from the plains, bought the hides, processed them, and sent them on, opening the door for new business. Klay Allison, a well-known figure of the Old West, treated guns as if they were part of his own body and temperament. He didn't accept being called a gunfighter. He preferred to be known as a shooter. In duels and demonstrations, he mastered the six-shot revolver with unusual precision, and his fame grew from that mix of skill and bold attitude. After the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, the horse took on a new role among the Plains tribes. By driving the colonizers out of New Mexico, the Pueblo communities took thousands of horses and other Spanish livestock. From that turning point on, the animal spread among the tribes, changing travel, hunting, and the way they fought. On the long march west, pioneers and cowboys crossed borders carrying a shared habit: coffee always within reach. Around campfires or on horseback, kettles hissed at dawn, getting the body ready for hard work. It wasn't any kind of luxury. It was the daily dose that kept eyes open and steps steady. Roy Bean, born around 1825 in Mason County, Kentucky, decided early on to follow his own path west. At 15, he left his family's home to join his older brothers. Between risky trips and all kinds of work, he lived a nomadic life and learned to fend for himself while the horizon kept calling him non-stop. Mastering the lasso, a key tool in working cattle, came from cultural exchanges. In the 18th century, the technique reached the West with Spanish conquistadors and became established with Mexican ranchers and vaqueros. Later, contact with Texas cowboys refined the movement's vocabulary and styles that crossed borders and entire eras. For decades, the Old West held a special place in the American imagination. Across plains, shifting frontiers, and growing settlements, stories of travel, conflict, and new beginnings multiplied. Books and movies reinforced the idea that courage and risk drove settlers, new towns, and the memories the country learned to share. Anna Emmeline McDooley, known as Cattle Annie, became famous in the Old West alongside Jenny Stevens, known as Little Britches. Still very young, they traded predictable routines for dangerous rides, carrying messages, watching roads, and giving logistical support to gangs. They took part in robberies and became legendary figures among outlaws. Before 1858, expansion into what is now Colorado moved slowly, with little railroad structure. The discovery of gold near what is now Denver changed everything. People, money, and goods arrived in large numbers. To connect mines, towns, and markets, the tracks spread out and became the backbone of the state's economy and settlement. Almost 200 years ago, the Texas Rangers emerged as a force meant to bring some order to a territory in transition. They patrolled long borders, acted in conflicts, and accompanied those seeking land to settle. Their work helped shape the state and explains why the group's name still carries so much weight in Texas memory.